Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Al Pacino and Dan Stevens are performing a series of exorcisms in The Ritual. In 1928, Father Joseph Steiger, played by Dan Stevens, is asked to take in the troubled Emma Schmidt, played by Abigail Cohen, who is believed to be demonically possessed, so that Father Theophilus Reisinger, played by Al Pacino, can perform a series of rituals to exorcise her. As Steiger witnesses the ritual, he has doubts about Reisinger and his methods, but as Emma's condition worsens, they will all need their faith to heal her. The ritual is ostensibly based on the true story of the real-life exorcism of Emma Schmidt, who was given the name Anna Eklund in accounts such as the pamphlet Begone Satan, which is one of the sources that this film is based on. This isn't the first time that Schmidt's exorcism has been adapted, you'll be completely unsurprised to hear, as there was a very low-budget film called The Exorcism of Anna Eklund released in 2016. I've not seen it, but by all accounts it's pretty rubbish. But Emma Schmidt's story is purportedly among several that William Peter Blatty took inspiration from when he wrote The Exorcist, which of course would be famously adapted as a film, especially elements like an old and a young priest working together. And The Ritual is directed by David Madell, whose last feature was the critically acclaimed The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, so he has experience in adapting fact-based dramas, and he re-teams with Enrico Natali to write the script. Of course, when I say this is a true story, you should absolutely take that with not so much a pinch of salt, but the entire salt shaker. Not just because The Ritual obviously sensationalises events for the sake of the film, although a lot of the basic facts are correct, but because frankly, the story itself is a bit dubious. With a more skeptical reading, Schmidt's behaviour sounds more like episodes of severe mental illness, and whilst this is, quote, the most reported exorcism in American history, we know that exorcisms are more usually abuses that are committed on the unwell. That makes it hard for me to really get into an exorcism movie, especially ones purporting to be based on real events, besides the obvious problem with exorcism movies: they're all the bloody same. It's the same tropes from The Exorcist played out ad infinitum. Oh, and needless to say, this has nothing to do with the 2017 movie with Ray Spall that I reviewed a few years ago on this very channel. I know this is petty, but it's genuinely annoying that this shares the name with a fairly well-known movie, not just because it's a bit confusing, but because it really should be called The Rituals. There are several rituals performed in this movie, and you even get little subtitles that say Ritual 1, Ritual 2, and so on and so forth that appear in the corner, and The Rituals is a far more distinctive title that doesn't share the name as several other movies already. And if it seems like I'm being especially grumpy today, then that's because I watched The Ritual 2025. I had something of an epiphany regarding exorcism films after I saw The Ritual. They're the cinematic equivalent of The Faith Healer at a revival meeting. Since The Exorcist came out, there's been a decline in religious belief, so more modern exorcism films are less about religion and more just putting on a big show for horror fans. They present exorcism as spectacle, with big pyrotechnics, people getting ragdolled, buckets of blood and vomit being thrown around everywhere, becoming this fantastical battle of good versus evil, allowing them to distance themselves from the reality of exorcisms. It's all theatre, just like the healer using the energy of the crowd. Oh lordy, 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 give me the power to heal this sick girl Reagan and pull the demon out of her. It's no surprise that more recent exorcism flicks lean into their camp value, usually featuring a slumming Oscar winner to give it some credibility and also ham it up, like The Pope's Exorcist, which is nominally based on a real person, but gives us Russell Crowe with a dodgy Italian accent riding a Vespa, and the less said about The Exorcism, also featuring Crowe, the better. And it's in that tradition that we have Al Pacino as our exorcist, which is a bit of a coup for this kind of movie. Pacino might not carry the same prestige he once had after doing a lot of direct-to-video movies, but outside The Devil's Advocate, it's very rare to see Pacino in a horror film, unlike his peer Robert De Niro, who has dabbled in the genre several times, usually with quite mixed results. Given Pacino's reputation for loud, shouty performances, you almost expect that kind of acting from him in this kind of role, like he's going to tell the devil, I knew it was you, and I cast you out! Hoo-ha! Hallelujah! I almost wish it was that kind of acting because it's far more interesting than what we get. Instead, Pacino is in fairly subdued form, and you can sort of see why he was drawn to the role. Rising it is doing these unorthodox things that seem to be making the situation worse, not better, and his secrecy makes you question his morality, but there's also a paternal edge to him, almost like he's a surrogate father to Emma, having been in her life for so long, so he feels an obligation to rid her of this demon once and for all, no matter the cost. In a couple of the better moments, you can sort of see that come out from Pacino. And Pacino is a great actor who has made some classic films, there's no denying that. But as soon as he turned up in this movie, wearing a robe and mumbling in some cod European accent, I just couldn't take him seriously. My brain just went, nope, not having that. And I couldn't help but giggle, especially in his fairly early scenes. He doesn't even get a memorable introduction. Forget the iconic entrance in The Exorcist. Pacino is introduced in this movie just, sitting in a church pew. This might be the most unconvincing Pacino has been in his entire career. He's downright hokey in The Ritual, and that's pretty much symptomatic of the entire film. Like Pacino, the film is trying to take this seriously. In contrast to other exorcism films which almost flirt with self-parody, The Ritual is trying to take things almost back to basics. Madel wants to try and ground this in reality and make it feel authentic. He wants the audience to feel how punishing this is on everyone involved, and how doing these exorcisms casts a heavy toll on them. Having to watch all of these disturbing, sometimes unexplainable things just play out in front of you. It's a noble aim, but it's taxing for an entirely different reason for the audience. It's incredibly boring. The Ritual, as you would expect, runs through the usual tropes of exorcism movies, from projectile vomiting to Emma shouting out blasphemy and talking dirty to the priest, or mysterious cuts and swelling appearing in her body, or suddenly bouncing off the walls and attacking people. In fact, pretty much the only thing they don't do in this movie is have her head do a 360, because that's unrealistic to do in a true story, as opposed to her doing her best Spider-Man impression. Poor Abigail Cowan is clearly giving it her best. She's intensely committed to playing this possessed character and was clearly a very physically intensive part. She even gives a girl next door sweetness to Emma in the moments where her possession is less apparent. That's despite the fact she's at least 2 decades younger than her real life counterpart reportedly was, who was likely in her 40s at the time of her exorcism, but they've cast someone younger in the role because they want to evoke Reagan in The Exorcist. And therein lies the issue. If you're going to take this seriously, you have to reimagine it and find a fresh angle on it. But Madel doesn't. He just recycles the same imagery that we've seen in countless other exorcism movies in the exact same ways that they've been done before, and brings nothing new to the table. And in the film's defense, because the story inspired The Exorcist, of course there's going to be things that feel very familiar because it's the originator, but this is a film that's coming after 50 years of copycats and derivatives, so The Ritual has to do something to make itself memorable, but instead it's the John Carter of exorcism movies. It doesn't work as drama, and we'll get to that, and it sure isn't scary. And because there are so many exorcism scenes, it also becomes repetitive too, so there's plenty of opportunity to be bored. And if you're skeptical about exorcism, then the movie's actually playing towards you somewhat. The real main character of the film is Dan Stevens Steiger, who does come from the angle that he isn't entirely convinced about what is going on. Steiger was the observer in the original pamphlet, so Stevens spends a lot of the movie just standing around on the sidelines, just jotting notes to himself, when he isn't doing his other main bit of acting, which is putting his head in his hands like this. That might not be acting. Stevens is a solid actor. You think of something like The Guest, for example, but he struggles to do much with the material. I suspect he took this for the chance to work with Pacino rather than the part itself, where he was a last-minute replacement for Ben Foster, who dropped out. But Steiger as a character is struggling with his own faith, not just because of the horrors of exorcism, but because he's dealing with the grief of recently losing his brother. I have to admit that last part actually came as a bit of a surprise to me as an audience member, because in the opening scenes, he almost seems cheerful, even cheekily pinching a bit of food almost flirtatiously. Later on, though, he spends a lot of the film looking very glum indeed. They talk about the toll that this whole affair is having on the local community, but you don't really see much of that, other than Stevens being tasked to try and convey that in his meetings with Mother Superior, played by Patricia Heaton of Everybody Loves Raymond fame. Steiger is the one that's debating whether Emma is actually possessed or whether she's just mentally unwell, but these ethical questions draw attention to uncomfortable things that the movie doesn't really want to address. If anything, the fact that he keeps asking questions is part of the problem. Steiger thinks that Emma shouldn't be tied up at first because that's cruel, but he soon relents once she starts getting up and injuring the nuns by ripping their hair out. Reisinger tells him that the reasons that the exorcisms keep failing is that he simply doesn't believe enough. If they're going to succeed, he has to give himself entirely to faith, not just in the Lord, but also Reisinger and his methods. In other words, shut up and stop asking questions. That's pretty much the same conclusion the movie comes to. But Madell doesn't just recycle from other exorcism films, he also recycles their visual looks too, even where it makes absolutely no sense. A lot of the exorcism films from the last 15 years or so have been found footage or mockumentary style, like The Last Exorcism or the notorious Devil Inside. So they have that kind of shaky handheld look you associate with that. Inexplicably, Madell and his cinematographer Adam Biddle have applied that aesthetic to this movie. You know, a period film that's set in the 1920s. It's a very strangely anachronistic choice, and I think they're trying to make the audience feel like they're in the room, but it feels like they copied it because they thought that's how exorcism films should look and didn't understand why they were filmed like that. But it's also such a modern digital video look, it also calls attention to other things in the production design that don't feel like the period, like the fact that the nuns, led by Twilight's Ashley Greene, appear to have stepped out of a Hollywood beauty shop before they put on their habit. And the camera work in this movie is absolutely horrendous. Everything is shot like it's being grabbed across the room on a zoom lens, and the camera is constantly swaying and moving, often crash zooming in the middle of a line of dialogue. I'm not exaggerating here. Every single shot in the movie is like this. It's absurd. It's filmed like you handed a camcorder to your drunk uncle at a wedding and they're just twiddling with the zoom lever. It's so constantly distracting, not to mention downright nauseating, that it was absolutely doing my head in. And the worst thing about this kind of fidgety camera work is that it mistakes constant movement for being engaging. It's a crutch, instead of making actual choices in the moment. If the film started stable and then got gradually more handheld as it escalated, that would be a choice, and one that served the story. But constantly filming like you're in the midst of an earthquake is exhausting and meaningless. So you end up with this perfect storm of poor coverage exacerbated by choppy editing, likely in part because the camera work is so bad, where key moments border on visually unintelligible. There's a moment where Emma throws up in a bucket, yeah, we sympathise, and there's meant to be mysterious tobacco leaves in what she's just honked up, but because it's filmed at such an awkward angle, and the shot cuts after almost like a split second, you don't even get enough time to actually register what's in it, and I wondered what the hell I was supposed to be looking at. I only know that it was tobacco leaves because it was reported on in the real events. I genuinely spent a lot of the movie going, what possessed you to make your film look like this? The Ritual 2025 valiantly wants to return the exorcism film to something real after years of films that play towards the more outrageous aspects of the subgenre, but unfortunately it's a slog. Horror fans are not going to find anything that they haven't seen before, nor is it engaging on its own terms, failing to even feel credible or believable as a true story. Pacino and Stevens are both actors that are far better than this film deserves, but that doesn't mean they can save it. And Pacino especially just comes across as a bit goofy for trying to be as solemn as the film itself is. But by far the worst thing about it is that irritating cinematography, which feels colossally misadvised and never stops drawing attention to itself away from the action. And when by far the most memorable thing in your movie is the camera work in the worst possible way, then you need an intervention. I don't care if it's a cross or a tripod, just find something to rest the godforsaken camera on. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page, or my YouTube Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can exorcise the demon of demonetization over at my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and subscribe, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.